Today we're going to have another edition of Justice Then, Justice Now. Today's guest is Ken Cates. Ken is a career federal agent, law enforcement expert. He has worked everything, undercover. He's worked for a couple agencies, and he rose to the ranks of being an executive with the various agencies and the special agent in charge on what's happening today with the border in Arizona area. And he should provide real insight into this. This is an individual that lives in the southwest border region. He knows the problems. He knows the solutions. He's not somebody that's a talking head on mass media that has either never been there or been appointed to those positions politically. So this is, like I said, this show is the real deal. It has the entire criminal justice spectrum for the listener. I am going to talk about a book he wrote, Everything Changed. It is an account, it's a fictional account of border life and what it is to be an agent there. I think that this should be handed out to Homeland Security and DOJ so that they understand the whole process that has been controversial for the last couple of years there. It's my pleasure to speak with Ken now. Ken, thank you for getting up early this morning and on East Coast time, and it's a pleasure to talk to you today.
Well, thanks very much. It's my pleasure to be here. Not that early. It's only an hour. We only have a little hour difference. I live in right outside Dallas, Texas, and the only really thing I'm missing this morning is my golf game. So you are a special. It's a special event for me to do that.
Yes. Yeah, I was I watched I'm not a golfer. I tried to hit a golf ball like a baseball my whole life, so I wasn't very successful, but I did enjoy the PGA championship with the former Olympic champion who long overdue won one of the majors and that, and I like following it, and I think it's a great sport, to watch as a spectator. Especially the 19th hole. I think that's a tradition. My father was a golfer, and I used to say to him, he would growing up in Massachusetts, he would get up early in the morning, finish his work by 3:00 and hit the links, and then hit the, after he played 9 holes, he'd sit at the 19th hole and watch Walter Cronkite on TV or 12 o'clock high or shows like that. So anyway. Thank you very much for coming on. If you could, in the first segment, I'd like to talk about what got you interested in law enforcement, where you grew up, and just to start out with that, I think would be the best thing.
Well, let's see. It's kind of a funny story, I guess, because I never was interested in law enforcement. I really didn't have the slightest inkling about law enforcement. I expected. Initially, I thought I'd be try to be an attorney, and then discovered that was just too hard and a little boring. I thought, with all due respect. But I grew up in Mesquite, Texas, right outside of Dallas. It was a little country town at that time. It was known for the rodeo. So, a bit of a country guy, I guess you'd say, certainly suburban. But I got into law enforcement on a fluke because I'd started college. It turned out to be very expensive, and ultimately Uncle Sam came calling. I went into the Army for 2 years, and long story short, when I finally got back out of the service, and was finishing up my college degree, really with an expectation that I'd wind up being a high school history teacher at this point, my mother called me and said, she asked me if I was in trouble or, what have you done? I said, I have no idea what you're talking about, Mom. She said, well, some federal agent is calling here trying to reach you. And
Oh my God.
I said, gosh, I don't have a clue what you're talking about. In fact, I didn't even, except watching the FBI on TV, I didn't know anything about the feds. And anyway, ultimately, I called the guy, and turned out he was a recruiter, and said, well, you need to come down for an interview. I said, an interview about what? Why are you calling me? And the guy said, well, didn't you apply for a job here? And I said, not that I know of. And at any rate, he said, well, oh, I see, you're a VRA guy, which was a program that the government had at the time, the Vietnam Veterans Readjustment Act.
Yeah.
And he said, well, you must have signed up for this program. I said, Mister, when I was trying to get out of the Army, I signed anything they put in front of me. I wanted to get out. And anyway, I went down and interviewed, and got offered a job in the Regional Intelligence Unit for DEA. And then after about a year, ATF offered me a job as an agent, and the rest is history. So it was kind of a fluke, really. Turned out it paid a little more than teaching high school history.
Yeah. But a little more dangerous. But today, being a teacher in some of the inner city schools, I don't know which is more dangerous, Unfortunately, those are the times.
I agree.
Yeah. So tell me about when you went to ATF. What was that like, and when was that? And
well, let's see. I guess I started with ATF about the end of '74. So I'm kind of an old guy. I think I finally got on in about early '75, and I got hired in Dallas, and then ultimately I went to Little Rock as my first office, and I'd always wanted to travel. I'd always wanted to see the country, and so I decided that I would give California a try. And after about a year and a half in Little Rock, which was a fun time, but not as perhaps not as actionable, I guess, as I thought it might be. Then I transferred out to California, and ended up working in Sacramento, and then down in Los Angeles, which is where I spent the majority of my time as an ATF agent, working out of the downtown LA office.
We've talked before, and we have mutual people that we know, because I was in Los Angeles in the mid '80s also with the Marshal Service. So there's a lot of, it's a very small law enforcement world, especially probably bigger now with a lot more agents than we had. But when you only had like 2,500 nationwide for each agency, you pretty much cross paths with a lot of people and that. So tell me about LA. What was it like working? What kind of cases did you work? And that.
Well, you're right. We certainly do have some mutual acquaintances. In fact, if you've been in the feds, you know that that's not atypical. A guy might start out in the Marshal Service and wind up in ATF, or gosh, I've had guys that were in the FBI and wound up in Customs with us. But when I got to LA, I got initially posted to, I guess the most, at least in our view, the most action-oriented office. It was called the Downtown LA Metro Group, and we had every bad part of LA that you can imagine. South Central, Watts, Compton,
Rampart, yes.
Yeah, Hollywood, West Hollywood. So we had the inner city, and we were primarily a gun enforcement group. So we were out looking for violent criminals that were creating nefarious deeds using firearms, and we did a lot of gang work. We were in what was affectionately known then as the ghetto just about every day. We also supported and participated with the arson group, the downtown LA arson group. So we had a lot of fires that we worked. I joined the ATF National Response Team while I was in Los Angeles, so that sort of aided my travel. It would give me a little break from being down in the ghetto, so to speak. We could get out and go to a bombing or a fire and work those incidents forensically. But actually, I always said that my time in Los Angeles in the LA Metro Group, probably some of the funnest time that I ever had as an agent. We worked a lot of undercover in those days. You wouldn't believe it, but a Texas cowboy looking guy. In fact, that was an undercover name I used a lot, was Cowboy. Texas cowboy looking guy and one of my closest friends and longest partners, a little Italian guy. We were down in the ghetto working stings and buying guns from gangsters. In reflection, it seemed like almost every week. So it was quite a diversity of work. Out on the streets, running with LAPD, running with the gang units, the Sheriff's Department crash units. And then, of course, come Monday, you might have to put on a suit and be in court. I always said that being an ATF agent back in those days was about the most challenging, I thought, challenging job you could have as a Fed, because being an ATF agent was fairly close to being a true street cop. But at the same time, you might, as I said, you might wind up on an arson scene the next week. You might wind up in court, the following week. And then, of course, you had to take care of all your own internal paperwork. The ATF system at that time was a lot simpler than it is today, I'm sure. We had to account for all our own undercover money, so we were our own accountants. We did a little bit of everything back in those days, and we did it with some of the greatest guys I ever met, some of the funniest, most dedicated, hardworking, courageous group of guys. And not just in ATF. We worked closely with Secret Service, who were in the office right next door to us. We worked with the customs guys out of Terminal Island at the time. So, and certainly we worked with LAPD almost constantly. So, great cast of characters in our own office and in those different agencies. And wow, it was a really, I always say it was the greatest time in the world to be an 1811, a special agent, because we had just enough technology and resources to be out ahead of the crooks, but regulations and rules hadn't really caught up with us at that time.
Yeah, I always tell people that our travel program was having GTRs in your pocket. And if you had to do a controlled delivery or you had to go after a fugitive, you just walked up to the airline counter, filled it out, and got on the plane. Everybody's like, well, didn't you have to get approval for that? I said, the approval was that you were going to go out and make an arrest, and like LA, like some of the watering holes like Gorky's and Emmy Lou's downtown that we went to. And, the big movie that was out then was Live and Die in L.A. with Secret Service, and put them on the map for Petovich and for the counterfeiting and the check forging and all the stuff, which, and I went later to work at Secret Service as a consultant on their assets, seizure and financial investigation. So it was a, like you said, a totally different world. And the many friends that we've accumulated over the years are from different jobs. I always said that I stayed with an agency until they restarted my 5-year background, so they wouldn't catch up with me and I could retire. You know what I mean? So.
Well, you can't hit a moving target. That's what I always said.
That's a good point. Okay, so you were in ATF from what years in Los Angeles?
Let's see. In LA, I was there from 80 to 86, I think.
Okay. Yeah. I was there
muscle mail, right?
83, 84, and part of 85. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a good time. Little
Yeah,
different.
it was. It was a great time. We were there during the Olympics. The Olympics was a big deal at the time. Thankfully nothing happened. It ended up being a boring assignment, but a
Were you on the
lot of
task
guys.
force for that?
Yeah, we all were.
Yeah.
ATF brought in a bunch of
Nice.
guys from all over the country, and we actually were just doing presence patrolling, I guess. That
Yeah.
during all that we were driving around from venue to venue, and in fact, that was one of the biggest investigations that ever happened in ATF Los Angeles. Then was because on one boring evening, an unnamed agent. And again, this shows you how far back technology goes. Took his two-way radio, and Johnny Paycheck's "Take This Job and Shove It" was playing over the AM radio at the time. So he keyed the mic and broadcast all over the LA basin and the task force frequency, "Take this job and shove it."
Oh my God.
And I think our office, our bosses had about a 3-week investigation trying to identify who that culprit was.
Home in on it. Home in on it. Yeah. Now I'm dating myself too. Home in on it. And that. Yeah, I when I was out there during the Olympics 2 weeks before, I had a case in Oxnard, and it was a fugitive who had assumed the identity of a dead person. I'm going to promote my book a little, but we went up there and he had blown up 2 police cars in Spokane and the courthouse. And ATF was involved, and the Bureau, of course, because it was terrorism.
Of course.
They got to get in there. The FBI listeners, I don't mean to offend you, but but anyway, I was involved in that, and like you said with that, and you're kidding around. Seriously, you had some very serious cases, and I'd like you to talk about the one that involved the chief in LAPD. I think that's a tremendous story.
Well, again, I think upon reflection, I think that was another quasi-famous agent's case. It was a young agent at the time named Bill Queen, but he started that case, and it involved the Aryan Nation, which was prominent at the time, and it ended up being an undercover case, and worked with LAPD on it. But the LAPD had a controversial unit back then called the Intel Unit. I think it had another name, but it was essentially an intelligence function, but later got banned, I believe, but we won't get into that.
Yeah, I know they're talking about.
Yeah, so that particular case, a bunch of Aryan Nation skinhead types were interested in acquiring a bunch of fully automatic weapons, and were involved in converting semi-automatics to automatics. And so our office there, the Metro Gun Group, got involved in that case. Our agent worked undercover. Ultimately, there was some threats made against Daryl Gates, the chief of LAPD at the time, and so we worked that case. And in those days, an investigative group would be about 8 or 10 agents, and it was a pretty tight-knit group. So if one guy was out on a case, the whole group was out. We tried to have a standing rule back in those days that you run the deal doesn't run you, and the standing rule was we don't want to have any deals that go on Friday night, Saturday night, or Sunday night. So try to keep your deals during the work week.
Federal Friday.
Couldn't always make that happen, but we tried. And at any rate, we ended up taking down that group of guys, getting a warrant, raiding them. LAPD and some of their significant players came out there. We took all those guys into custody and prosecuted them. And then Daryl Gates came over and gave us a big pat on the back, and we all got our picture taken with Daryl, the inventor of the SWAT concept, and that picture floats around from time to time.
What was that tank? There was a name for remember the tank that they got to demolish houses.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. What the heck? I
it's
can't remember. That was
terrible.
where they put the big long spear on the front of
Right.
like a Brinks armored car
You know,
truck, and
they were
they would
selling them
run
up
that
at
thing through the
the
side of
police
a ghetto
academy.
house.
Yeah. We would go up there
Yeah,
for
they would.
for the clam chowder on Fridays, and to see
Right.
Heather Locklear swim in the pool for T.J. Hooker. Remember those days? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Yeah, we used to. Most law enforcement agencies and certainly ATF back then, they gave us I think they gave us 3 hours of paid time a week to work out. So that was our go-to spot.
See,
We'd go up to the LAPD Academy,
it's a little slow
and
with me, but the name of it was RAM. That was what they called
yeah, I
it,
think that's
RAM.
right.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I have
yeah,
this
we'd go
useless
up to.
information that goes into my brain the closer I get to 70. So, okay. How can I say?
Yeah, believe me, I'm living that. But yeah, we'd go up there to the LAPD Academy and run on the track, and eat in the cheap cafeteria, and try to get gun deals out of the gun store that was up there, and then we as I said, we worked in the ghetto constantly, so we were on many raids with LAPD where they ran that ram through the side of a house and about pulled down some kind of a crack house or something down there. It was wild times, really. I mean, I look back on it, I think, my gosh, I don't know how we didn't get we didn't get really hurt down there,
Oh, absolutely.
because we were really winging it many times.
Running and gunning. That's exactly what that era was right there, especially in that city.
Yeah, we had a great. I'll tell you, I think all really productive cops will tell you that what makes a great investigator is having great informants, and
Hmm.
we just happen to have about the best informant that we ever had down there. In fact, I hate to even call him an informant. He was he was a cooperating individual, and that guy could generate more gun cases down there. He was at the time, of course, we were young guys. I think he was about 65. We called him Old Nicky. We thought Old Nicky was old. Oh, sorry, we got an Amber Alert or something coming up
Oh,
here.
okay. That's important.
Uh,
That what happens when I hear that noise. I have one of those sugar monitors, and it goes off. It went off yesterday on my phone, and everybody's like, "What's that?" I said, "I shouldn't have had that martini at lunch." No, I'm kidding with you, but it does go off. Go ahead. Sorry.
so, but that's really what made. We did one of the very first. My partner Jimmy and I did one of the very first headquarters monitored special projects down there. So we came up with this concept of instead of having a storefront kind of sting where we would buy guns, we had a mobile sting. So we first used old Nicky's van, and then we got our own undercover van, and we made a circuit all through South Central, and every day we would have different stops, and we would roll up in our van, my partner Jim and I, and of course our LA Metro cover teams would be around, and we would just meet these gangsters on the street and buy stolen guns, and occasionally we'd buy dope from them, whatever it took, and really sit on the street corner and smoke a cool cigarette, and drink a couple of beers, and talk them right into prison. So it was a wild and crazy time down there then, and it was all really based on the teamwork that we did, and based on having great informants, and as begrudgingly, because back in the day we would never have admitted this, but begrudgingly we had some supervisors that gave us enough rope to either hang ourselves or make us pretty good agents, and luckily we're still breathing. So
Trial by fire, right? That's exactly
right,
what it
for
was.
sure.
So you were there. So let's go to follow you with ATF and where you moved to after that.
So from having lived in LA that even in the 80s, traffic every day was just a nightmare. It was just unbelievable. I lived down in Huntington Beach, which from my driveway to my parking spot in the downtown Federal Building was about 30 miles, and that was
2
typically
hours.
an hour 15 to an hour to 2 hours on the road one
Right.
way. So that also actually facilitated a lot of undercover work because we knew we were going to be stuck in traffic, so we might as well just stay at work and work down the ghetto till 8, 9 o'clock at night, and then drive home with less traffic. But
I had on my desk a sign, and it said, "We arrest fugitives by appointment only," because it was the same thing. We had to know the guy was there because the chief deputy, who was a former Marine, would come in and say, "You got arrested today?" "Yeah." How sure are you on a scale of 1 to 10? Well, I always learned 50% chance, just so 51. So we would go out and do it. But I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead. Tell me about that.
No. That's exactly the way it was. It was just the commute was a struggle. So after 5 or 6 years of that, I loved ATF. I loved being an ATF agent. I was relatively successful, I guess, and so I kept just trying to get transferred to one of the outlying offices closer to my house because there were a couple of other outlying ATF offices in Long Beach and down in Santa Ana that were 30 minutes on surface streets. But I think I submitted a memo to transfer to one of those offices. I think my record was 24 times because I would submit it once a quarter, 24 times to just leave downtown, leave the Metro Gun Group, and just go to a little slower paced office. And so ultimately, my special agent in charge then, after about the 20th time, I got my memo back, and he had handwritten on it, "Your repeated requests for transfer are noted. They are not in the staffing pattern at this time, and you can expect to remain in the LA Metro Gun Group for a long, long time."
Kidding me.
So that's
Masra Road,
that. No,
Gracia
that's a true
Paranada.
story. That's a true story.
Wow.
And so I thought, golly, maybe it's time to do something else. So, about in '86, to kind of digress, customs up until about '84, '85, '86 in that area, customs agents were essentially precluded from working narcotics cases because of the DEA, the creation of DEA in the '70s, and a lot of customs agents had been merged into DEA back then, I think in '72. And so customs worked, they worked general smuggling and a lot of commercial import fraud and things like that. I mean, they certainly earned their pay, but they didn't really work narcotics. But by the mid '80s, the war on drugs was really going on, and dope smuggling was so prevalent, particularly down at the U.S. borders at all the ports of entry, and the process at that time was that when the uniformed customs inspectors and customs officers would catch a load of dope in a truck or a car or what have you, they had to call a DEA agent to come down and take the case and take it to federal court. And DEA just got overwhelmed. Those were called port call cases. DEA had gotten overwhelmed and recognized that they needed some help. And Customs got, at that time, cross-designated Title 21 authority to work narcotics domestically. And so Customs put on a huge hiring to take on that new program that they had, that expanded narcotics program. So, man, Customs in the late '80s, Customs was hiring guys from DEA and ATF and Secret Service. I mean, just about everywhere. FBI guys, and so to go back even further, back in, oh my gosh, I think it was around '78 or so in ATF. Ronald Reagan had, who was not an ATF fan when he got elected president, had committed to abolish the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and
You're going to
Firearms.
talk about the RIF notices, right?
Right.
Okay.
So
reduction in force.
Yeah, we had all gotten RIF notices back then, and so a lot of guys did what ATF management called jump ship. A lot of those guys that got a lot of agents back then in the 70s went over. They went to Secret Service and other places, but seemed like predominantly a lot of guys went to customs as agents. So by the 80s, when I was told I was going to be in downtown LA for a long, long time, a lot of those ex-ATF guys had moved into customs management positions. So from those, and as you point out, most of your friends are guys that you worked with. So still knowing some of those guys and knowing that customs was hiring, I kind of put out some feelers and got got some positive feedback about just transferring over to customs there in LA. But then they also pointed out that, boy, they were really hiring down in Texas, which has a huge Mexican border. And if I ever wanted to go back home, I might ought to consider that. So long story short, I ended up applying. I actually went back to ATF and said, well, look, these guys offered me a job, and I'm thinking about going unless you think there's a possibility that I can get, out of LA. And ultimately they said, if I were you, I would take that job. So,
Wow.
So I did. I transferred to customs. I was lucky enough to get picked up as a customs agent down in San Antonio, Texas. So that was my impetus to leave ATF, to leave my longtime friends. I mean, I had about a little over 12 total years with ATF when I left, 12 or 13. It was really all I knew, and despite having worked a couple of cases with customs out in Los Angeles, boy, I really knew nothing about customs. But it was an opportunity to get back home, be closer to my parents. My parents were getting elderly then, and get my kids out of LA at the time. So really, once again, sort of fate just intervened, and I pulled the trigger on it and got transferred down to San Antonio, and the whole world of mother customs opened up to me there.
What year was this?
So that was the fall of '86 when I left LA.
So
I think it was 80. Sure it was 86.
This was the Von Raab era when they really started beefing up enforcement and all that. I'm anxious to talk to you about when he closed the border, which is legendary. But anyway.
Commissioner Von Raab was the commissioner then.
Yeah. So you went to San Antonio.
I did. I went to San Antonio. I ended up at the time I had a pilot's license, and I now I have my attack dog barking on the other end of the house.
It's lunchtime. So that's why. Did you feed him?
Probably means my wife has an Amazon package being delivered somewhere. But so I had a pilot's license. Again, it was kind of a funny story. I reported for work, on a Monday morning, and ATF that I had just left was pretty, it was pretty structured. I mean, and we were accountable to our bosses, and we had a lot of bosses that had that idea that, to quote one of my partners, that
agents
ought to be all in their places with bright shining faces. By 8:30 you should be in the office. That kind of stuff. We believe me, we had plenty of workarounds for that. But when I got to customs, the first day I showed up, and there were just a couple of the SAC secretary and the admin officer were there, and I said, "Hey, I'm the new agent. I'm here to report." And they said, "Oh yeah, no one's here today. You're gonna have to come back tomorrow."
Oh my gosh!
I said, "No, I can't come back tomorrow. I mean, I got children. I need to get my insurance transferred over and get my pay started." And they went, yeah, no, they're all at the range, and then they're having a barbecue out there, and so no one will be here until tomorrow. So you just got to come back tomorrow. So I ultimately did talk them into letting me sign on, but essentially I came back on Tuesday and walked into the SAC office down in San Antonio, which was a small office that was originally about 8 or 9 agents, and at that time was ballooning to about 20. And so there were not enough desks, not enough cars, I mean, you name it. So I walk in on the second day on Tuesday, and the ASAC met me, the assistant special agent in charge. And he said, "Oh, yeah, the SAC told me you were coming. What group are you going to be in?" I said, "Man, I don't know. What groups do you have?" You know, I knew nothing about customs. And so the ASAC said, "Well, what are your hobbies? What are your hobbies?" And I said, "Well, I'm a big runner. I'm a pretty big runner, and I golf a little bit, and I got a pilot's license." "Oh, you got a pilot's license? Oh, you're in the air smuggling group." So
that was coming.
that's how management was back then. And he said, "Yeah, they're over at a big orange hangar over at the San Antonio airport. They're located with the customs air guys over there." And I had actually already been over there, and I said, "Yeah, I know where that is." They said, "Well, just go over there, and they got an acting supervisor over there to just tell him you're assigned to his group." And I don't want to bore you, but upon reflection, I said, "Okay, well, all right, great. Well, how am I going to get over there?" He said, "Well, I don't know." I said, well, I need a car. You know,
G-Ride, come on. Yeah.
"Where's my G-Ride?" He said, "Oh, we don't have any cars. So we're going to get some, but we'll get you a car. Just see the lady out front. She'll lease you a car for a while, and then, we'll figure something out." I said, "Oh, okay." I said, "Well, how about equipment?" He said, "Well, like what?" I said, "Well, how about like a gun?"
Yeah.
"Yeah." I said, "How about like a gun?" And the guy looked at me, he said, "A gun?" He said, "Don't you have your own gun?"
Texas.
I said, "No."
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I said, "I don't have a gun." He said, "You came from ATF. You don't have your own pistol?" I said, "No." I said, "In ATF, you got to carry a government gun. So I got a deer rifle and a shotgun, but I don't own a pistol." So he reached down in one of those big old, mahogany government desks that he sat behind, those big, huge executive desks, and pulled open this big file cabinet, and there was about 20 pistols of every kind of make and model thrown in there, automatics and revolvers. And he said, "Hey, just grab one of these and pick one out, and then tell the property guy to put it on your paperwork when you think about it." So I picked out a little 5-shot stainless steel Smith, which in ATF somebody had to die or retire.
Yep.
Yeah, Model 60, cheap special. Somebody had to die or retire to get that gun in ATF. So I got a little cheap special, and I said, "Okay." Then I said, "Well, how about some ID?" He said, "You'll get that when you go to customs agent school." I said, "Well, when's that going to be?" He said, "It'll probably that could be a year or longer, because we got a bunch of new hires that are going to those academy classes now." So I gave him the pistol back. I said, "Well, then I probably won't need this pistol if I don't have any ID, Yeah. So he said, "Okay, wait a minute." And he goes in the little front office, comes back with a customs letterhead, and it said, typed on it was, "To whom it may concern, this will certify that Kenneth Cates is a special agent with U.S. Customs authorized to make arrests and carry firearms. Signed, acting special agent in charge." And then he gave me a blue government credit card, and that was the ID that I carried for my first year in customs.
He didn't say a little note on the side, "We don't need no stinking badges," right?
No. Now within a couple of months, they did send me a temporary badge from Glencoe, from FLETC, and a little laminated ID card. But I carried that letterhead. Man, I got on airplanes with that and a blue government credit card more than once in my first year.
The good old days.
It was
very organized.
I said, "What about a vest?" I said, "I need a vest." And he said, "A bulletproof vest?" He said, "We don't have any of that stuff in customs." He said, "I don't know about all you transferee guys, but we don't have any of that stuff in customs." And I mean, that's how primitive it was in '86 when I came to customs.
Wow.
So once again, as I say, it was the greatest time to be an agent, because they basically said, "Here you go. Here's your government steed and a gun. Go forth and do good stuff and just figure it out," And we did. We went out, and man, customs had some incredible. they were called air officers at the time, and customs pilots who were all law enforcement guys.
Right.
And man, we would just get in airplanes and fly around and follow airplanes that were coming across the border and land behind them, and fly out to some remote desert strip and eat good Mexican enchiladas in West Texas for lunch. And it was just a wild, wild time. And I guess it was sort of the closing days of air smuggling, because that was really just before the cartels sort of organized and put all the independent smugglers out of business. Back in those days, you could just fly across the border to some Mexican town, buy 500 pounds of weed and fly it back in. And within 8 or 10 years, the cartels organized all that, and you could fly to Mexico with a plane, but you probably weren't flying back out.
So what did you do with the and just for a personal note, we had a big time air smuggler on yesterday who got out on a compassionate release and quite a character from the Keys. So he got 7 life sentences for that. And
what's his name?
Dickie Lynn. Yeah, and he was on, and I'm going to have on after you one of the smugglers from the late 70s. He also received substantial sentences. So this should be good. And I never was in an air group like that. I mean, I was in airport response, which was totally different with that. And I love hearing smuggling stories, because I don't think the general public, they're so used to, and we'll get to your term in the border as the SAC, but this is refreshing for me to hear, because a lot of the complaints that we had as agents and as a first line supervisor, like I was, is we would get managers that hadn't lived the life, that had done a tour in headquarters, the deal, and then they come back and they're an ASAC or a DSAC. But go ahead, tell me what happened with the air smuggling then when you went there in San Antonio.
Well, again, it was still pretty primitive. Customs, and some of this predates me, so I'm kind of giving you some secondhand background. But as I said earlier, customs special agents didn't work narcotics up until the late 80s. Just by statutory limitation for Title 21, that all belonged to DEA agents. But the one program in customs that continued to work narcotics was the customs air program. So they had customs air officers and customs pilots who were just as much an agent as any agent you ever met. In fact, even more so. And for years, those guys had flown up and down the southwest border all the way from Brownsville to basically to San Diego, and tracked drug smuggling airplanes. They worked cases. They worked informants. I think they had an informant in every little fixed base private airport up and down the Mexican border. So those guys were very, very prolific. And even as that program evolved and they restructured and they ended up with air interdiction officers, and those guys were out there every day, patrolling and flying around and developing information and then doing interdiction work. And when planes would bust the border and radar would pick them up, those were the guys that launched in customs aircraft and customs helicopters, to land right behind a dope smuggling scheme and take those people into custody. So that was the environment that we kind of fell into. Those guys were veterans and knew what they were doing, and there was a little friction because the agency, as I said, customs was evolving, and agents really became preeminent in the prosecution of those kind of cases. But very, very common that we would be in the office, and customs had its own network of feeds from every FAA radar all over the country. And then in the 80s they put up a series of aerostats, those big balloons up and down the border, to finally cover places that didn't even have FFA radar coverage. So, they put an electronic net across the border, and as planes would, a typical smuggling deal was a small aircraft, might be a single engine, might be a twin engine, would an independent smuggler would fly into, oh gosh, you name it, Monterey or Piedras Negras or, wherever, take on a load of weed. Typically, I think it was weed smuggling, but might take on cocaine at the time, and then come back across the border. Of course, they would turn off their aviation electronics. They would turn off their transponders, fly really low, and then pop up, turn their transponders back on, and then land in Wichita Falls or Lubbock or wherever that they were based out of. And the customs communications and radar guys, our radar specialists, they were just constantly scanning those radar screens, looking for those unidentified targets, and they would launch customs aircraft. You'd get a call, and it would be like the fire alarm went off. The air crews would run to the airplanes, or we had some old Army surplus Mike model Huey helicopters. That was even before the Blackhawks came in, but you would run out there and jump in an aircraft with the customs pilots, and we would go chasing after those airplanes and land behind them in fields or on county roads, and jump out. And sometimes you caught dope, and sometimes you didn't. Just I guess a humorous story. I was sitting in the office in San Antonio, and one of those alerts came from the customs radar guys. And the pilots came running into our squad bay and said, "Come on, we got a hot target coming across the border from Del Rio." So, man, I ran out and we jumped in a Customs King Air, 2 pilots and myself. And at the time, I think I had a 6-inch Smith Model 66 .357 revolver with me. That was it, and a blue nylon Customs raid jacket. That was the sum total of our equipment. So we jumped in this customs airplane and took off, and all of a sudden, of course, the pilots are talking to the radar guys, and all of a sudden the transponder kicks on. Every kind of trapping of a smuggling deal, and they vector in behind the aircraft, and we're following it up from the Del Rio portion of the border, and it's headed right into Austin, Texas. And sure enough, it lines up to land at the executive airport out there, and it was getting to be right at dusk. It was a late summer, early fall, right at dusk, and normally the customs aircraft could get with the FFA controllers, and they would clear the customs aircraft to be directly behind the target. In this particular case, somehow another airplane got between us and the target. And so the target landed, then this second airplane uninvolved lands. And by the time we land, the target airplane has already taxied off the active runway, and it's over on a ramp over by a hangar, and a couple of white pickups have pulled up. And man, from our airplane windows, we can see 5 or 6 guys milling around, and they're getting some stuff out of the back of this high-wing single. So the customs pilots tell me, "Okay, look, looks like they're offloading. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to stop on the active runway. You open the door and jump out. You run over there and interdict that load, and we'll taxi back around and be there to help you as soon as we can." So, being bulletproof and foolish, I thought that sounded like a pretty good plan. So sure enough, we landed on this very active runway. I pop open the door, I jump out, they close up and taxi on down. And being a young guy, I'm sprinting over there towards this airplane, and these 5 or 6 guys and a couple of trucks, and they're loading stuff into the back of the trucks. And I got my Smith, 66 out, and as I get up there closer, running up there,
your CS1, that's what it was called. Yeah.
No, mine wasn't a CS1. This was it was a 3-inch Model 66.
Oh my gosh.
That CS1 was a big, heavy thing,
Yeah.
So I run as I get closer. I begin to see that these guys all look kind of elderly. You know, they don't look like the typical smugglers that we've been dealing with before. And so I start slowing my jog down a little bit. You know, just doing a situational assessment. And now these guys see me running up there in my blue and big yellow letters, U.S. Customs federal agent jacket, and their eyes get big. And so I get up there right to the aircraft, and there's all these like 70-year-old men standing there, you know, like in the cowboy boots and
Right.
and what, you know, they look like a bunch of Texas Rangers, khaki pants and white shirts, and their eyes are big like saucers. And so I kind of lower my gun and I go, "Good evening, gentlemen. Yeah, I'm from U.S. Customs. Do you guys have anything to declare?" And
Oh,
they're
shit.
like, "No, that's what I said." They said, "No, why? What's going on?" I said, "Well, didn't you fellows just come in from Mexico? Didn't you just fly in from Mexico?" And they said, "No, we didn't come from Mexico." I said, "Well, it looked like you kind of busted the border according to our radar. Are you sure you didn't come from Mexico?" And these guys I mean, they got on $1,000 cowboy boots, these guys, you know. And I'm like, they said, "No, we were at a judicial conference in Del Rio." And one guy speaks up, the pilot. He said, "Well, you know, right there when you take off from Del Rio, if you don't bank just right, you might cross that border. I might have strayed into Mexican
Just
airspace,
shit.
but if I did, it was by accident." And I said, "Well, you didn't have on your transponder." He goes, "Yeah, I forgot to turn it on. I turned it on as soon as I realized I didn't have it on." I said, "Well, okay." I said, "I think maybe if you could just show me your ID." So, oh yeah. So they all start reaching in their pocket and getting out their driver's license. And the first guy, the pilot, hands me his card. And I look at his card and it says, "State of Texas Chief Supreme Court Justice."
What?
So it was five of the justices of the Texas Supreme
Oh my
Court
gosh.
had been down at a training conference, and those were the guys we interdicted. So about that time when I realized, what, okay, this probably is not a smuggling group.
No.
Then their eyes get big as saucers again, because I hear these footsteps coming up, and here comes the two pilots running up with ARs, you know, at the ready. And I'm like, "Okay, fellas, you know, we got this handled. Let's don't make a bigger deal out of it." But they were very nice. They were so impressed that Customs could pick out their airplane and follow them in, and you know, an interdiction stop like that. And it was just one of those things that happened back in those days.
Wow. Yeah. If that was a different state with a different Supreme Court, it might have been a lot different. You know, if it was up in the Northeast or something like that. Okay, so you were in that group, and what happened from there with your career? Where did you go?
So you know, by then after 3 or 4 years in Customs, um, and as I said, Customs was on a big hiring push back then. I mean, the office went from like 10 guys to 50 guys in a couple of years. And so management opportunities sort of opened up, and I wound up being the acting supervisor for the air smuggling group. And you probably remember back in those days, we used to get these little green biweekly pay stubs, right? It would,
Oh yeah.
you know, all your leave and what your pay
And
was, and it would say
we
what's
all
your
dreamed of the Fliola check,
that's
right?
right. Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I by then had become I got promoted to be a 13, a non-supervisory GS 13 agent in Customs. And so every 2 weeks, my pay stub said GS 1811 13, step whatever. And one day I get my pay stub and it says, I think it said GS 13 step 5 or something. So one day I get my pay stub and it says GM 13 step 00. Now my pay was the same, but I said, "What the hell is this?" So I go to the SAC office and said, "Hey, something messed up here on my pay stub. What the hell's GM? And the HR, the lady that ran HR said, "Oh, the SAC made you a supervisor. Didn't he tell you?
Oh my God.
You're in management now." And I said, "No, he didn't tell me." He said, "Oh yeah, he made you a supervisor. You're the permanent group soup now." So I went to go see the SAC and I said, "Hey, I don't want to be in management. I'm a street guy." And he said, "Nah, we transferred you down here. We promoted you. You owe me. I need a supervisor. You're it." And that's how I got into management. And then, again, generally, long story short, within a year or so, Customs came along and desk audited a bunch of jobs and upgraded
To
the jobs
14.
from 13s to 14s. And my job got upgraded to a 14. And right after that, I got sort of strong-armed into that same ASAC that I told you that told me to come back the next day. That guy left or retired. He went out on a medical, and really, when I wasn't looking, the SAC selected me to be the ASAC, and I'd only been in Customs 2 or 3 years. And from then on, it just one thing led to another. Ultimately, like most guys, I wanted to get back home. The Dallas area was my home. So without belaboring every little machination, I ultimately got transferred up to Dallas, where I ran the rack office at DFW Airport, which was another huge of a atmospheric change. A different kind of smuggling, different kind of cases. By then, we were working pretty much straight domestic narcotics cases. So we were working cases, undercover narcotics cases, controlled deliveries, constantly coming through the Dallas area, coming out of El Paso, coming out of South Texas. Customs had a big push on for money laundering then. As it turned out, I had a minor in accounting, so took some classes and started working money laundering cases. Customs in Dallas and in Houston were heavily involved back then in doing undercover currency pickups for dope smugglers and laundering their money and identifying the network. So Dallas was a big hub for some of that. And again, we were pretty successful. That period is when the Oklahoma City bombing happened, and Oklahoma City was one of our Dallas rack offices. So we were heavily involved in that investigation for about a month and a half at the bomb scene. And you know how it works in the system. The more exposure you get, the more people you know, the more headquarters risk you run. And ultimately, one of my ex-bosses tapped me to come to headquarters, transferred to Customs headquarters, where I got, I think, probably to this day, the shortest directed reassignment headquarters tour in the history of the Customs Service.
Then you were a legend.
I got directed reassignment. Yeah, I'm a legend. I got directed reassigned to headquarters, which, street agents and supervisors, try to avoid that. And I'd been there
Personal
about 30 days.
experience, yes.
Right. So, exactly. So I'd been there right at 30 days. I was the special agent in charge of Cube 135 or something, and I got promoted 30 days into my headquarters tour. I got promoted along with another good friend of mine and direct reassigned to San Juan, Puerto Rico as a deputy special agent in charge. So I had a 30-day headquarters tour, but it counted. It checked that box. I had a directed reassignment, so I was off the headquarters list from then on, And I did a couple of years down in Puerto Rico.
What year was this? When was this?
99 and 2000.
Okay.
Part of 98, 99, and into 2000.
Okay.
And again, that was a great experience. I met so many really incredible, great customs agents and ATF agents and other agents working down in San Juan, working the Caribbean. Got to do a lot of work in all like 21 island nations that are down there in the Caribbean, and met some of the hardest working, great people that you'd ever want to or have the privilege to supervise. By then, I was a deputy SAC. And then, you know, again, as fate in my career intervened, and Ray Kelly, the former New York City Police Commissioner, came in as the Commissioner of Customs. And one of the first things he did was he basically reorganized the Office of Internal Affairs for Customs from top to bottom. Basically, out with the old, in with the new. So a bunch of people got drafted into Customs Internal Affairs, and a good friend of mine. Again, you know, sometimes it's who you know. A good friend of mine was the Deputy Assistant Commissioner for Internal Affairs, the highest agent that was in IA at the time in DC, and I think I was a second choice. But in the end, he called me and said, "How attached to San Juan are you?" And I said, "Not very." He said, "Well, then congratulations, you've been drafted into Customs Internal Affairs." And I left there and did a 3 or 4 year stint in Customs IA, got promoted there, and then my time in IA came to an end. By then I was down in El Paso.
Where were you in IA? Which office were you in?
I was in several.
Okay.
When I got drafted into IA, I actually went to Seattle to open a brand new IA office. After I set that office up, I got sent to San Diego Internal Affairs to fill in behind a controversial supervisor that had moved on. And then again, just like I said earlier, everybody always wants to go back home. So I had the opportunity to go and open an internal affairs office in San Antonio for Customs. So then I moved back to San Antonio, and then ultimately my boss, the regional office, the IA was set up a little differently. It was set up in a regional special agent in charge. So basically East Coast and West Coast, and or East Coast, West Coast, and the Southwest border. The border was its own office, and the IA office, regional office, was in El Paso. So I wound up running the El Paso office after my boss retired. Then and IA was a rotational assignment. My time in IA came to an end, and there was a vacancy in the SAC office in El Paso. So I just moved across the street and ultimately became the SAC there in El Paso. Then I tried to retire there, and by then I was ready to retire. My mother was very ill back in Dallas. I wanted to get back home, and so and of course the merger had happened by then. So in 2000, the Customs and INS merger had happened, and we had converted to ICE, and so they negotiated with me, and I got to go back to Dallas for my last couple of years as a SAC there.
That's amazing. That's an amazing career, and the mobility with the management. I mean, I avoided a headquarters assignment because I went to the National Drug Intelligence Center in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. Because you know that when you get closer to 50, they know they got you between 47 and 50. They do. You know that, Ken. They can pretty much, you're not gonna go to another agency or leave or anything like that.
No, you're gonna bite the bullet.
Exactly. So, yeah, when you were in Puerto Rico, I was in asset forfeiture. We did some training there. I was the recruiter in Miami in '97, and I recruited a lot because remember they were only hiring the border in Puerto Rico. You know, that was it. So we had a bunch of alcohol, tobacco agents that for the state that were going to get laid off. And I recruited them, and it was kind of funny. I said, "Do you have Spanish speaking ability?" And they said, "No." I said, "Can you say this? Quería comida, por favor." And they said, "Yeah." So we pushed them there. I brought some of the guys, they didn't speak a word. You can blame me for that. And then when they left, they learned it. So, yeah, it's amazing. I want to ask you about the border because you were the boss. And what do you see with the border as far as the way it can be improved? I'm not going to sit here and give a political speech, but I had David Geddes on, who was in Mexico City. He was the DEA country attaché, and prior to that in Colombia, and I worked with him in Miami and in Costa Rica on cases. What do you see what's happening now? Because this is justice then, justice now, with the border that's going on. Primarily, it's recently moved from Texas to Arizona and California, especially now, in San Diego. What do you think? I mean, I have my opinion on the solution: tighten things up, build the wall. Everybody stay in Mexico and the ID checks, because we're going to get terrorism here. It's going to happen. And that's something. So someone like you, I'd value your opinion as someone who's experienced the Southwest border.
The border law enforcement, particularly federal law enforcement, but all border law enforcement, is fraught with danger, and it's a very volatile area, and it's a heck of a challenge. In fact, I'll digress. When Customs and INS merged, we had a lot of, I'm sure you can imagine, headquarters meetings about how to merge our agencies, and you cross-train the agents and what have you. And so I'll never forget that one of the senior headquarters INS guys was in a meeting with us over training or something. But at any rate, the guy, there was a lot of friction. At that time there was a lot of friction.
Yes.
Who was going to be the dominant agency? And
it was going to be the Sachs.
Customs sort of ended up being the dominant agency initially, and as I said, it created a little animosity. And so I remember this guy was a assistant regional commissioner or regional commissioner or something, and he said, you guys in Customs, you think you won. He said, but you're going to find out that federal immigration law enforcement is the most complex, problematic program in all of federal law enforcement. He said, everybody, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, wants to say that they have an immigration enforcement agency, but they don't really want it to be successful. The Democrats want the immigrant to come in and be a voter, and the Republicans want the immigrant to come in and be cheap labor. And so everybody wants an immigration enforcement agency, but they really only want to use it as a stick in the eye of their opponent when it's politically expedient. So, I thought, yeah, this guy sure is bitter, Turned out he was kind of prophetic. But what I'll say is this: what I learned working on the border, and particularly working in management and doing some observation and studies, is that number one, I'm, full disclosure, I'm a conservative Republican, but you have to have secure borders, or you don't have a sovereign nation. I mean, that's just fundamental. And in my experience, I wrote some papers on this. It really takes five things to secure an international border. And we didn't get into it, but after my law enforcement career, I was a contractor for Department of Defense, and I did a lot of border consulting in Iraq and Afghanistan for them. But this premise works wherever. It takes five things to secure a border. Number one, it takes some form of physical barrier. So whether it's a fence or a river or a mountain range, there has to be a defined bit of a physical border. Number two, it takes an active patrolling organization. So the U.S. Border Patrol, Customs, ICE, CBP. It takes an active patrolling organization to secure that physical barrier. Number three, it takes a robust prosecutorial and/or deportation operation. So there has to be some threat, some risk to the border crosser, that you're either going to go to jail or you're going to get sent back to Guatemala or wherever you came from. Number four, and I sort of added this after the fact, I think it takes electronic enhancement and technological enhancement of those previous three things. So high-res cameras, sensors, UAVs, that kind of thing. All the electronics of, radio monitoring programs, all the electronic programmatic support that you can cobble together. And then the fifth element of securing the border is what I call a robust predictive intelligence function. So you need to have, you need to work in sources. You need to work, just like I said, informants make the
Human
agent,
intelligence,
right?
a lost art. Mm-hmm.
Right, and you have to. It has to be a predictive intelligence function, so that you're able to redeploy your resources to deal with surges and that kind of thing. So if you can put together those five elements, a fence, a patrol unit, a prosecutorial program, electronic enhancement, and then predictive intelligence, you can secure not 100%, but I mean in the 90 percentile, you can secure your border, and that's what's lacking. We lack the political will to engage in that kind of investment in our border security, and we've done a pretty good job in days past with the Border Patrol. I mean, that's a hard-working bunch of guys out there under tough conditions, but the world has changed. We've never seen the kind of numbers that are coming across the border now. We've never seen the sophisticated organizations. Many of the cartel organizations that really grew up smuggling dope now make as much or more smuggling people. So they have pretty good organizational skills. They've compartmentalized and they have specialists, and so the threat we face now is more sophisticated and more active than ever before, and you have to respond in kind, and we haven't done that.
And the other thing too, the Border Patrol, DHS, it's not a social service agency, it's a law enforcement agency, and that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to do that. I mean, I remember with Customs, they referred to people coming into the United States as customers. Do you remember that? That was, sure. We had a commissioner who said that. And it was very demoralizing with that, because coming to the United States is a privilege, not a right. It's like a driver's license. It should be the same principle. You screw up, or you come here under false pretenses, or you obtain a driver's license, that's what you need to do. You need to enforce that. So I'm hoping that comes about, and you've lived it firsthand. I mean, as an executive, that's something that you see it at the top. You saw the formulation of ICE, and I remember when that happened, the merger, I called it. I remember we had a meeting in Miami. We had at the Embassy Suites. We had food, a punch bowl, stuff like that, and we had immigration and customs on the side. It reminded me of Catholic school, like a cotillion, when you're in 7th grade and you all gravitate and that towards each other. That was the best way to describe it, And you know, we're removed now to over 20 years. I mean, it's been in place over 20 years. But one thing, the problems are still the same, you know, and the training. You know, I work as a private investigator now. I deal with immigration stuff, you know, and you know, I had the training with it, like you said, and that. But I wish I had more time to touch on the experiences over with what you did as a contractor. That's amazing. Can you give me an overview? I mean, a lot of that stuff I'm sure you can't talk about, but what was it like for you going over there?
Well, I was ready to retire. Again, we were about 3 or 4 years into the merger by then, uh, and you know, I think I had 34 years as a special agent by then, and I'd given a class. I'd given a class on the border. Uh, I'd given a class on the border and uh, to one of these three-letter uh, intel agencies, and so one way or the other, my name got forwarded over to a private company that had recently gotten a contract with the Department of Defense. And if, long story short, if you'll remember, about '07, the biggest threat to U.S. troops in the Middle East in CENTCOM was IEDs. You know, IEDs that's what was killing our troops. And the Department of Defense, particularly the U.S. Army, put together a group of retired and current Delta Force guys, basically, and had said, go figure out how to combat IEDs. And after a few months, they came back and said, man, you need some cops. You need some guys that know how to investigate this stuff and start attack the network and figure out how this is getting funded and who these bomb makers are. And so again, long story short, the Army in the meantime had created the newest, what they call a special mission unit. So there are a few special mission units. Delta Force is one of those, and a couple others. And they created an outfit called the Asymmetric Warfare Group, AWG, and it was headquartered up at Fort Meade, Maryland, right beside NSA headquarters. And so that organization was about half contractors and half active duty military. We were commanded by active duty military, and we deployed in small teams to Iraq and Afghanistan. And we would initially, the concept was we would go and take on the asymmetric threat of IEDs. But once that program started, they realized that there were all kinds of asymmetric threats. There were crazy sniper organizations over there and money laundering organizations. And so working in tandem in a small group, 5, 6, 8 guys, we had a series of law enforcement guys that would go out, and whatever particular problem in a particular area was, we would attack that threat. So we basically employed special agent skills, anti-gang tactics, money laundering, investigative skills, and identified targets that the real high-speed great Americans would take on.
Okay, that's amazing. That's amazing. So
pretty interesting history.
Oh, I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is. When I was at the National Drug Intelligence Center, I was the first DHS person there, and with DEA and DOJ, and I worked on IEDs. That was what I did there.
Absolutely.
I didn't do drugs because that was such a problem.
Yeah, we shipped a lot of information back to the States to the Intel Center.
Yeah. I want to touch on the book, and I definitely want to have you back because we just breezed the surface, and I have a lot of questions, and I think the viewers are interested in. with this because of the hot topics that are going on and that. And I want to talk to you anyway because we got to know the same people. I mean, I know people that were in
Oh,
Dallas.
for sure.
Okay. It's a very, very small world, and it is. Can you touch on the book? What motivated you to write this? And and that. How did this come about? And what you want to share, the story, what it was based on. I think the viewers and
Sure.
I recommend this book. I read a lot. My vision's getting worse by the minute. I got the turned 50-year-old 20 years ago and started missing at the target from what was it, 7 feet we had to shoot at with the hip shot. So
That's right.
I suffer that.
So I guess the history is one of the things that made me successful in my career was I was just a good writer. I don't know why. Sometimes you just have those innate skills. So I wrote a lot of search warrants. I wrote a bunch of Title III affidavits. Obviously, I wrote a lot of reports. Particularly in ATF back in the old days, we had a very formal case reporting system. So you didn't just go over to the U.S. Attorney's office and say, "Hey, how about prosecuting this guy?" You had to submit a formal, looked like a master's thesis sometimes, had to go through the chain. And so at any rate, I just developed the ability to write well, certainly in the law enforcement arena. And in fact, I wound up many times writing warrants and what have you for other guys, which would give me a modicum of credit for the case, but because my name would be on the paper. But I guess all those years and then of course when you got into management, I learned to write bullshit.
White papers. It's not bullshit. Those are white papers. And if you were
I don't know if I can say bullshit.
you can say whatever you want. You should have seen the New York cops on here, how they talk. I think we're
So,
and that. But I just wanted to mention you were an affidavit. You wrote you were an affiant for a Title III, and that is very rare. I wasn't, and a lot of people weren't. But I'll leave it alone. But some people took credit that they did that with Title IIIs when all they were on was listening, or they were on the street doing the surveillance based on it. So I give you credit for that, my friend.
well, yeah. No, I did a couple. I did a couple in my career, but at any rate, and then as I just pointed out, once you get into management, you got to learn to sling a little bullshit, and so over the years, just like you and just like everybody else that's been in law enforcement and in federal law enforcement, you tell stories over beers, and I must have heard 100 times, you got to write that down. You got to put that case down on paper somewhere. That you should write a book. So that was the seed. So there was a book that was written as a fundraiser several years ago for the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial and Museum, and it was a compilation of stories, that law enforcement guys had written and submitted and got put in the book, and the proceeds went to support the museum. And so I think I was the only Fed. I got asked to submit a story, and a lot of those stories were kind of heartbreakers, and shootings and accidents and the stresses of being a cop. And I didn't want to write that, so I wrote a funny story about the time 2 ATF agents saved the city of Los Angeles from a mustard gas attack, which is another long story we'll do maybe next time. But
we're going to do it.
At any rate, I wrote that story. It got published, and I kind of got the bug. I thought, man, if I could write a short story, maybe I could write a book. And I had a very good friend, a non-law enforcement guy who had written a couple of books himself about the old Southwest. I was in El Paso at the time when he got those books published, and so he encouraged me that that he could help me write a book, and so we really just sat down and started brainstorming, and believe me, it's a chore to write a novel, and that's what this is. This is a complete work of fiction that I cobble together, incidents from a bunch of cases over the years. Of course, all the names are changed, um, and you know they're just stuck together. They're disparate cases that I wove into this story, and it's a story of air smuggling in the southwest border, particularly outside of El Paso, in the mid to late 70s. And you know there's some dope smuggling crooks and some corrupt cops and some rogue federal agents and a couple of on the edge informants, and there's a little sex and a little boozing in there. So, you know, it's pretty much a everyday occurrence in an
Art
agent's
imitates
life.
life. Yes. Okay.
Right. So anyway, yeah, it's called Everything Changed, and it really is set. The title comes from that period where, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of independent air smuggling used to go on in the 70s and into the early 80s, and then as the cartels came in, that way of life kind of changed, and the independent operators got overtaken, even in Mexico, by the cartels. And so this is a story that's set at that particular time, where some border ranchers find themselves, unfortunately, becoming involved in a air smuggling escapade that is supported by some corrupt border cops. And anyway, there's a lot of shooting and high adventure in there, and a little sex and some border lingo. So I kind of wrote it and shopped it around to a bunch of my friends, some attorneys, and frankly, I have one friend. His wife is a huge reader, and she has a big book club. So every month, like 35 of our friends all read a book, and you know, sit around and have cocktails and talk about it. And so I just gave them my manuscript, and man, the feedback was awesome. So it really encouraged me to finish it. And ultimately, I found a publisher, Dorrance Publishing, published it for me, and so it's out there. All you got to do is Google it. Everything Changed. You can get it at DorranceBookstore.com. You can get the electronic version on Amazon, and
the hardcover.
So please buy it. Buy Everything Changed. Make me rich. You know, I'm just an old retired guy now.
No. Yeah. I got one last question for you. We are going to talk in the future, because there's different aspects that in 2 hours we can't explore, and that. But very important for today. Dallas or Boston tonight?
Oh man, well, you know, I'm a Dallas boy. I was actually born in Dallas, and I was born at Parkland Hospital, and so you know, I'm a Mavs fan, and I'm really heartbroken so far, but I'm looking for a big bounce back. You know, I got some very close friends in Boston, so I'm, you know, if for no other reason,
you're talking
I can't
to a guy
ribbing.
from the Commonwealth,
Right.
So we'll make a little wager over this. I mean, it's not fair. So you get me a hamburger, and I'll get you a steak if at the end of the series that. I think we gotta put it there.
That's not going to work. Here's what we're going to do. If Dallas wins, I'll expect a 6-pack of a good Boston Sam Adams, something like that.
Okay.
If Boston wins, I'll send you a 6-pack of Lone Star.
Okay, that sounds fair. You know, but yeah, that's what we'll do. Maybe I'll come out and do it in person, because I fly a lot on American, and I go through there. So,
yeah, great. Let me know. You know, be glad to sit down and meet you at the airport in one of those long layovers.
Well, we can go to Deep Ellum and really get ourselves trashed, but we'll figure it out.
For sure. We're big foodies down here. My wife's a big foodie, so we know every high-end restaurant and every hole-in-the-wall Mexican food, so we can take care of it.
That'll work. There is no real Mexican food in South Florida until you go to Homestead, but that's about it. Well, thank you very much, Ken. Appreciate it, and you coming on Justice Then, Justice Now, and you got time. Well, yeah, you could probably, with the daylight savings, you can probably get 18 in today.
Oh, yeah, you can count on it.
Bye. Thank you so much. See you.
All right, take care.
Thanks, Ken.